if they're getting this one objection a lot, what are they saying? I know a long time ago, you used to be a client.
That's right.
What did you used to sell?
At this stage, sometimes the better question is, what didn't I sell?
Objections are triggered reactions because typically there are words you use where they feel like you're selling them. There's certain questions you're asking that are so surface level that the prospect never emotionally opens up. What are your thoughts on that? I'll show you guys just a classic example I see salespeople do all this time. Hey, let me ask you a question. And then you don't want to do that because you're bulldozing.
It's a common thing that we think and see in sales is like, okay, like here's the problem. Oh, we have exactly what you need for that. I'm going to match it with, some sort of solution that I think we have for them. And because of that, it just falls flat.
So typically salespeople or entrepreneurs or business owners that, watch this show on YouTube or they listen to it, they want to learn how to sell more. In your mind, like what are their biggest struggles?
I think like the biggest thing that people come to us on calls that I see is.
All right, Jeremy Miner, welcome to another episode of Closers Are Losers. Now, the man, the myth, the legend, Matt Ryder, our CEO, cannot talk. His voice is not working today. So we are actually on with one of our lead account managers. Mac, you're way over there on the other side of the building there. I love the nice awards behind you. So we're gonna interview Mac, and typically, what we like to do on these shows, we do our podcast a lot differently. A lot of times, people will bring in like experts and they'll kind of talk about their story, and which I love. They'll talk about their story, or they'll go over some theories and everything. And I really like that. But we always find that salespeople like to learn how to sell more. So, our tens of, I don't even know how many downloads we get, maybe a couple 100,000 a month, could be a little bit less.
Just a few.
More. Just a few, could be less. Sometimes I exaggerate by a few people, and then our attorneys are like, no, we don't have 200,000 downloads. There's 199,650. You're exaggerating, Jeremy. Okay, if I exaggerate by 500 people, I don't know the stats in and out. I never look. So typically, salespeople or entrepreneurs or business owners that watch this show on YouTube or they listen to it, they want to learn how to sell more. Like they want to learn some tactical skills. But first of all, Mac, I mean, you're on our account management team. There's tons of you guys now, both here in the office in Scottsdale, working virtually all over the world. Maybe let's go over, like, when you're talking, because you mainly talk with like individual salespeople that sell anything, right?
Sure.
Okay, so we got some of you that specialize talking to companies, others specialize in talking to like individual salespeople.
Mm-hmm.
So when these salespeople come on with you, like in your mind, like what are their biggest struggles? Like maybe give me a couple, 2 or 3 things that they're bringing up with you that they're having issues with. Let's talk about that, and then
Right.
kind of what
Yeah.
correct that.
I think like the biggest thing that people come to us on calls that I see, whether it be an individual sales rep or maybe like a business owner that's kind of in the trenches doing some sales of their own, is they're just not quite sure what to do.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that, they're unsure about like what questions to ask, or I get stumped on this objection. I'm not quite sure how to handle it or what I'm doing that's actually triggering that. And then I think it just kind of transcends into maybe a lack of certainty and confidence and actually like what they're doing.
Yeah,
And because they don't know what to do,
because if you're, and I think a lot of salespeople, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but even if, because a lot of times we ask salespeople, because what's the biggest problem in sales? I always say it's the problem that you don't know you have. That's the biggest problem in selling, because if you don't know what your problem is, you don't know how to change that. So like you had said, if they're getting this one objection a lot, well, what are they saying? What are they not asking? Or how are they using their tone that's actually triggering that objection in the prospect's mind? Because did that prospect wake up that morning and like decide, hey, when that salesperson calls me, I know I put in my name and number and became a lead, or when I get on Zoom with them, or when I meet them in person, that third question, because their tone sounds too enthusiastic, I'm going to go into fight or flight mode because I feel like I'm being sold. And I'm going to say, enough with the questions. Just tell me how much it's going to cost. And I tell you if I mentioned. Is it like they planned that out, or was it a triggered reaction from what the salesperson did?
It's a great question, and I think you hit the nail on the head there. Is like a lot of times I think people will talk about how, oh, my prospects are this or they're that,
Yeah.
but it's not like, hey, when I get on the call with, John Doe,
Yeah.
I'm planning on giving him the let me talk to my spouse objection
Yeah.
just for fun.
Yeah, objections are triggered reactions because there's sayings that you said. Typically, there are words you use where they feel like you're selling them, like they feel like you're trying to sell them, right? There's certain questions you're asking that are so surface level that the prospect never emotionally opens up, right? And especially because you don't know how to use your tone yet to get them to let their guard down, they stay surface level. So even when
Mhm.
you ask what you thought were really good questions, a lot of times they give you vague, generalized surface answers. And so when we ask salespeople these questions, I think for a lot of them, I think it really causes them to internalize that, hey, maybe it's not my prospects. Maybe the leads aren't really as bad as I thought they were. Maybe it's what I'm saying or not asking or how I'm using my tone that's causing them to say they don't have the money when they probably do have the money. Unless I'm selling a $1 million solution to a homeless person, they probably do have the money, but where they're currently spending that money in their mind is more of a priority to what your solution should be their priority, where they should spend that same money. So it's not like the money does not exist. Like if you're selling life insurance, it's
Mhm.
not like the $250 a month does not exist. They're just currently spending that on something in their mind they feel is more of a priority than your solution. So it's your
Mhm.
job as a salesperson to help them change their way of thinking. And instead of spending that money on their cable bill or something like Starbucks every day, they start to view, oh, maybe that policy is a better priority, or whatever you sell. It could be
Yeah.
cars, it could be jet planes, it could be cybersecurity to Bank of America, real estate. It doesn't really matter. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, I I think you're exactly right because people might say something's like too expensive. An analogy that I like to use from time to time to kind of help people like understand this.
Yeah.
If someone needs 10K for a car upgrade
Yeah.
or 10K for a life-saving operation,
Yeah.
which one are they going to go through greater lengths to make happen?
Yeah. Because they
Kind of a
already
yeah.
know it's a priority, right? Because they
Hmm.
feel the need.
Yep. And unless we uncover that, ask the right questions,
Yeah.
how are we going to help expand that gap and help them see how important it is for them to actually solve their problems in their mind?
Yeah, and it's really the questions and how you ask the questions, because you can have great questions, but if you ask them to, I mean, this is a whole nother subject. I was just training this to
Hmm.
to our advanced inner circle clients today, smaller group, more advanced clients that have to make a certain amount of income before they can even get into that program because we only let like 50 new people a month into it. I was training them that, hey, your questions are really good here on your sales structure written with you, but you're asking them so fast that you're not giving the prospect enough time to internalize what you're asking. And that's why you're getting quick, vague, surface level answers because you ask it too fast. So I want to, if you guys can, well, I don't know if you can see this. If you're on YouTube, you can see this. I want to practice what's called verbal pacing, okay, and verbal pausing, okay, that when I'm asking a question, it causes them to hang on to almost every word I'm saying where they're fully engaged. And I slow down the question, I pace it out where it causes them to think really deep about what I asked. And so now when they answer, they emotionally start to open up. Now, I know a long time ago, you used to be a client.
That's right.
What did you used to sell before?
So at this stage, sometimes the better question is what didn't I sell? But
What didn't you?
door-to-door alarms, solar, healthcare sales, fitness, logistics services, all sorts of different stuff before.
Yeah.
When I
So
came to you, I was selling software and a little bit of solar.
like SaaS and stuff. So
Yeah.
when you started learning as a client, because
Hmm.
you've been with us, I think for what, a year and a half, 2 years now?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Almost three.
almost three.
Yeah.
So before that, when you started to learn how to verbal pace, did
Hmm.
you notice anything different?
Yeah, just conversation stayed like surface level. And I think, one thing that a lot of our students learn, and kind of like you touched on, is like you can ask a question a few different ways, and kind of how you implement that pacing and those verbal pausing, they're going to give you maybe different responses than you would
Way
have if you
different
just ask.
responses. Yeah.
Yeah.
So even like this, I mean, I'll show you
Mhm.
guys just a classic example. I see salespeople do all this time. They say this, hey, let me ask you a question. And then they ask the question. So you don't want to do that because you're bulldozing. When you say, let me ask you a question, you ask the question, you're just bulldozing over them. A lot of your prospects will feel that. They'll be like, they feel like you're just trying to cram down a question, a sales question, to get them to answer a certain way. So then you can use it to manipulate them and try to close
Mhm.
it. But if I leaned in and I said, hey, can I ask you something? Now, what did I do there? What did I do there? Can I ask you something? See, that's a verbal pause. A verbal pause of about a second causes reps like, yeah, sure. What would you like to ask? Causes them to engage. Can I ask you something? See my facial expression? Like it's almost like I'm curious and / concerned. There was a, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. What do you have in mind? See, that's an example of a verbal pause. I even verbal paced out that small question. Whereas a lot of people are like, hey, can I ask you something? Oh, yeah, sure. See, too fast. Okay. Big difference there.
Yep.
All right. What else? What's another thing that a lot of times when you're asking different questions to individual salespeople, they start to maybe internalize, oh, maybe I do have that problem. I never thought about it that way. Maybe some hidden gems, hidden problems they never thought
Mm,
they had.
yeah, like you said earlier, I think the most dangerous problem is one that they're not aware of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, how are you going to know what your problems are unless you have like a separate set of eyes? Like, there's a reason why a back surgeon can't do surgery on himself, can't see his own back, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of these salespeople we talk to, like,
Mm.
they don't know what they're doing wrong, and when you kind of strip it back, you find out, okay, they don't have structure. Their tonality is a bit off. They don't actually, when they get objections, have a structure in which they walk through that.
They
And
wing
because of that, they're winging it Rambo style, and you don't have a
some
structure.
weeks they wing it better than others,
Yeah.
whereas we would teach you a specific structure to follow that the prospect feels is completely natural. It does not sound scripted because we teach you how to use your tone, but you have predictable results from it. So you're not
Mhm.
just, oh, 1 week I did really well, but the next week you're like, next week's like, man, I didn't make hardly any sales. What am I doing wrong? And then you change this over here, but you didn't really need to change this part. You're actually doing really good here. You should have changed this, this, and this, but you didn't know. You didn't know
Mhm.
what your problems were because you're trying to figure it out yourself, or you're trying to figure it out from somebody else in your company that doesn't know how because they have the same problem, or you take advice from other salespeople in your company that really have the same issues that don't know how to train you how to do it. And then it's just, you're always guessing every week. And when you guess, you have uncertainty. And when you come across uncertain to the prospect, guess what they start to feel? Uncertainty that you can actually get them the results you're promising them for your company. All right, so that's a good one. They don't have structure. They don't know how to verbal pace out their questions. They don't know how to pause. They don't know the right questions to ask for what they sell. And I find a lot of times, you know, one part of NEPQ, and if you're brand new to watching our show or listening here, NEPQ is neuro emotional persuasion questioning. That's the methodology that I developed over my 17-year sales career before I started 7 Level. It's mainly comes from my behavioral science background in school and my human psychology background, especially social dynamics. How does the brain make decisions? Why do they say yes instead of no, or vice versa? So a lot of it, what has to do is, we practice, part of NPQ is what we call situation questions. Okay. Now, these might even sound boring to you because situation questions, we're helping the prospect find out what their situation is. Now, there's two things that we have to do with situation questions. First is it helps us as a salesperson understand their situation because we have to understand what's going on. Okay. If you don't understand their situation, hard to build a gap to where they want to be if you don't really understand what's going on, because then you're guessing. And when you're guessing, it's like taking a bucket of mud, throwing it up against the wall and just hoping and praying something you're going to say is going to magically cause them to want to buy. We always call that hopium,
The hopium drug.
the
Yep.
hopium drug. I hope and pray it's going to work out. Very hard to make a really big living as a salesperson with the hopium drug, right? Number two is, more importantly, it helps the prospect understand their real situation. Now, why is that important? Because most prospects don't really know what their real situation is when you first start talking to them, right? And they might have an idea, but they don't understand the depth of that. They don't understand how bad it is. They don't even understand the consequences of what happens if they don't do anything. Okay. That's why we always train salespeople, every industry, that you can never, this is going to sound very counterintuitive to anything you might have heard if you've been through a lot of sales training. We train you not to sell to the needs of the prospect. Let me repeat that. We train you not to sell to the needs of the prospect. You're like, Jeremy, that doesn't make sense. Well, it does, because most of your prospects don't really know what their needs are, their real needs, when you first start talking to them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if a prospect comes on and they're like, hey, I'm having a problem with this. And you're like, oh, yeah, we have that problem all the time. Let me show you how we solve that. And you jump into your solution. You are doing them a huge disservice, because that might not really be the biggest problem they have. And now you're selling to this one need, whereas they might have 5 other problems. And because you jump into your solution, they're like, oh, well, it's not that bad. And then they try to get rid of you or waffle around, and, you're chasing them. Right. And I always give this analogy, if a doctor, if you went into a doctor and you said, hey, I got this really bad headache, I need some migraine medication. And they're like, oh, you need migraine medication? Let me show you. We solve that. And then they give you a prescription. And it turns out the migraine wasn't really the problem. The migraine was actually caused by a life-threatening tumor in your brain. But because they didn't ask you questions to find out about the pain and how long you've had the pain and what the pain is preventing you from being able to do, and other pointed questions, they didn't uncover what the real problems were. They didn't uncover what the real situation was. So they sold to what you thought you needed, whereas your real situation was 10 times worse. And that caused you to pass away early. So that's why doctors don't take your word when you come in and say what's going on. They have to diagnose you. They take you through a process to diagnose what your real situation is. So as a salesperson, that's what you have to do. What are your thoughts about that?
Right on the money. Because
Yeah.
I mean, like a doctor, you might get hit with a little malpractice if that happens, right? But I think, like that's a common thing that we see in sales is like, okay, like here's the problem. Oh, we have exactly what you need for that. I'm going to match it with, some sort of solution that I think we have for them. And because of that, it just falls flat. I think
Yeah.
there's a lesson I learned from you that I'll never forget, but I think you talked about like a knife salesman that
Yeah.
was selling knives,
Yeah.
and somebody says looking for knives. Oh, we have the sharpest knives in the world. And
Yeah.
then it ended up they weren't looking for sharp knives because I think like maybe
Yeah.
like the
No, it
dog.
actually happened to me. So
Oh,
this was probably
okay.
about seven or 8 years ago. I actually gave that example in our NEPQ 2.0,
Mhm.
virtual training platform, for client training. And I gave an example of when I walked into a knife store. So you're walking in, I don't know what it's called. It's like Chicago Cutlery or something.
Mm.
You walk in this huge knife store. They got every type of knife everywhere. I mean, it's all over, all the just knives. And I looked at these knives. I'm like, oh, how sharp are these knives? And I remember the salesperson's like, they are the sharpest knife in the industry. In fact, they are so sharp, the Navy SEALs for the government use these to cut the rope. And he started going over how sharp the knives were and how they were so good. And I was thinking like, oh, I think those would be too dangerous for my 15-year-old daughter who's learning how to cook. I'm afraid she's going to cut herself really bad.
Might be a hard objection to
And
overcome
then
at
there
that
was
point.
no, and he looked at me and he started talking. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want them to be that sharp, because I actually think my daughter's like 13 or 14. She's
Mhm.
learning how to cook. I'm like, I'm afraid those are too sharp for my daughter. Like, she's gonna cut herself really bad. And it just, the conversation was over. It was just a weird, awkward point. That was like, all we had to do was say, oh, well, it just depends. We've got sharp knives. We've got knives that are not so sharp. Now, you must have asked me that for a reason. Well, yeah, the reason why I asked you is I'm looking for, my daughter, she's 13 years old, and I just don't want something that's too sharp where she could really hurt herself. Oh, well, in that case, you'd want to look at, and he probably would have made the sale really easily. All he had to do, see, I told him what he thought I needed, and I didn't even say that. I just said, are these knives sharp? And he thought that I'm asking, like, I'm looking for sharp knives. So he started to pitch me on why the knives were so sharp and how everybody in the Navy SEALs and all these, government workers use this knife because it's so sharp, when all I was looking for was just a basic knife set that my younger teenage daughter wouldn't hurt herself or her friends with while she learned how to cook. Had he just simply asked a clarifying question, he 99.9% of the time would have made that deal. And those knives were, $3 to $5 grand per set. He probably would have made a decent sized commission on that. So that's why you can never sell to just what you think the prospect needs. Even if they said that, you sell to the real problems. So in that example, if I would have come in with a different question, like, hey, I'm looking for a set of like really sharp knives, instead of just saying, oh, well, let me show you the sharpest knives we have, I might ask like, oh, well, it just depends. What would you be using the knives for? Oh, you're using them for your 12-year-old. Well, I mean, I can show you those, but what happens if they're, too sharp and then she gets hurt? Oh, that's a good point. I never thought about that. What should I do? And then I'm going to maybe show him something different. Not saying that I wouldn't sell them, but I want to find out why he's even looking at in the first place, or why he or she feels like they need the sharp knives over regular knives. It just depends, So that's another important lesson. Let's give them one other thing. One other thing you notice that a lot of salespeople, when they get on calls with you guys, don't even know they need that. After you kind of diagnose and unwrap the issues, they're like, oh, I never even thought about that.
I think in like talking to them and like role playing, like they aren't actively listening, and because of that, it's just leaving holes all over their call. They'll hear something that would be like a red flag that probably needs to be addressed earlier on, and they don't do it because one, they aren't listening, and two, they might not know how to actually work around that. And because of that, like we can look back at the calls and identify that, probably can have a good idea on like what objection that they're going to get at the end, but knowledge is power.
We always talk about NPQ. We train you how to listen to what the prospect means, not just what they say. Let me repeat that. You have to learn how to listen to what the prospect means, not just what they say. Sometimes those are going to be two different things. Now, how do you do that? We train you how to interpret their tone. And if you can see them, how to interpret their body language signals they're giving you. I did a live on this the other day. It's quite interesting. I can actually show you guys if you want me to, if you didn't see this slide. That we went over certain questions that you can ask when you hear or see red flags, right? If a prospect gets on there, let's say if it's B2C, and they get on an outbound call with you or inbound or whatever, or you're in person, like, hey, is this going to cost a lot of money? Because I don't have a lot of money right now. Well, if you're selling B2C, that's a red flag. And I need to find out what they mean by that. I need to financially qualify them so I don't lose time on that. Now, if it's B2B, I might not get that red flag if I'm selling to larger companies. I'm not, because they already have budgets they have to spend that. So I'm going to get different red flags maybe if I sold B2B. Or let's say their body language shows you that they have some type of concern, or they're not understanding something, or they're closed off. Like you said, you've got to be able to stop that and address that, because if you're hoping and praying that they're just going to magically open up at the end of your sales process, well, you're hoping and praying, you're taking the hoping, you have no control. You have no, let's say, predictability, no control in that sales process. So let's say if you sold B2B, this could even be, let's say if you're at a, on Zoom and there's a husband and a wife, and let's say you're selling life insurance, or if you're selling cars at a dealership. I mean, this could be any industry. If you're selling, cybersecurity to Wells Fargo, and you're in the boardroom and you've already talked to a couple of their decision makers, C-levels, but now you got a boardroom of 8 other decision makers or influencers, and you go through slide, 31 of your presentation, your pitch deck, as some would call. I hate the word pitch deck. And you notice when you go through slide 31 that, hey, Karen over there at the end of the room, when you go through that slide, you notice that she goes like this, and she looks up like with like a weird face, and she's kind of closed off. Now, if I got that, what am I going to do? Am I going to hope and pray that it's okay and that the rest of the pitch is going to win her over and everybody else? Am I going to hope and pray it works out, hopium? Or should we find out what's behind her, giving you that nonverbal message through her body language, to prevent her, when you leave, from influencing everybody else not to purchase your solution. So I might stop when I see that and I'll be, hey, Karen. She's like, yeah. Hey, let me show you. Let me she wrote it here. You guys can write it down. This is called an NPQ diffusing question. We'll wrap it up. Hey, Karen, I noticed that when we went over XYZ on that last slide, you seemed a bit hesitant. What's behind that? Just so I understand. I noticed when we went over XYZ on that last slide, you seemed a bit maybe hesitant. What's behind that? Just so I understand. Concerned tone. Okay. Well, I didn't understand what you meant by this, or, well, I'm concerned that when we try to integrate it here, we could have this issue. Okay. Well, in that case, and now you're there to help her overcome the concern. And now you have a lot more control. And now she's not going to go influence everybody else there because you're resolving not only her concern, but all of their concerns as well. That's an example of, hey, I'm asking some questions. I'm listening to what she means by her nonverbal signal she just gave me, okay, her body language. I'm listening to what she means, not just what she's saying. And now I'm there to help her overcome concern. And now I have control of that sales process. Make sense?
Yeah, probably easier to overcome that there than, when they go back to the board and discuss it, I might imagine, but could
Or
be
if I'm
wrong.
selling B2C, and let's say I'm on virtually with the husband and wife, and let's say, example, I'm selling life insurance or something like that, right? It's one of the train 158 different industries. I think life insurance is the number 1 or 2 biggest industry we train now, tens of thousands in that space. And let's say that I'm talking to husband and wife, and the husband seems like more quiet, more reserved. He's not really opening up. She's opening up, but he seems to be opening up. I might then turn to him after I ask a question. What about you? What are your thoughts on that, Jim? And I've got to get him involved because he's giving me nonverbal signals that he is quiet, he's reserved, like something's going on. He's thinking, he's processing. I don't know what his thoughts are, so I want to find out. That's just another example. Or if he's like, hey, what about this? What would be a question they might ask? Well, what happens if this happens? Yeah. Let's go over that now. Has that happened to you in the past, or what caused you to ask that? Just so I understand. Oh, yeah. The reason why I asked you is like, when I was a kid, my dad had this, and okay, now I know he has a concern. Now I'm listening to what he means, not just what he said. And now I'm answering that question. That's just another example. All right, Mac, I know you're busy. I know you got more appointments today. Thanks everybody for being on. Max, thanks for jumping on here,
Thanks
filling
for
in
having
for
me
our
on.
CEO. Hey, I've had you on the show twice in the
I
last.
know, next man up. You're getting really good with the whiteboard. I just want to give you
I
a
know
compliment on
I
that.
get the
It's like John
whiteboard.
Madden.
I know I get the vibe board out here. It's like the playbook, I've got like thousands of trainings just on the whiteboard.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. You guys want to start? Probably a lot of you will ask, hey, where do we go to learn more? We'll give you some nibbles. We'll give you some different training. So we won't even charge you for this. You're welcome to join one of our Facebook groups. Let's have you go to salesrevolution.pro. Salesrevolution.pro. There's about 90 some thousand people in there. 90,000. Things grown fast in the last year. And we go live in there 2 to 3 times a week, different Q&As, different trainings. And you want more, we'll train you some stuff there. We even get testimonies from free training. People are like, oh my gosh, your free training is way better than any course I've ever bought that I paid for. So, you want to get into more advanced training so you can sell, 2-3 times what you are. You can always message us in there and tell us what's going on and talk with one of our account managers. But just start with our free stuff there at salesrevolution.pro. And then you're always welcome to go to Barnes & Noble, barnesandnoble.com. You can get this new book. It is a Barnes & Noble bestseller, Amazon bestseller, and a Wall Street Journal bestseller. It's only been released about 4.5 months ago. New model of selling to an unsellable generation, written by myself and Jerry Acuff, CEO of Delta Point. And we give you a lot of tactical questions to ask and why to ask those so you can sell more. So go to barnesandnoble.com or your local Barnes & Noble bookstore to pick up your copy if you want to sell more. If you don't want to sell more, you don't have to. But sometimes it's really good to sell a lot more since you're going to work the same amount of hours every week. Just going on them there. Mac, thanks for having us on. Everybody, we are wrapped. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.